All right, welcome everyone this evening. It's good to see many of you in the new year and for our first meeting of this new year. I'm going to just jump straight into everything. So we've got quite a few things to get through today. I want to make sure we finish at a reasonable time. So just to let everyone know, this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. So is there any apologies for absence? I know the one I want to note is that Councillor Manley can't make it, so Slavek is kindly joining us today to fill in. So if that could be noted, please. But are there any other apologies to note? No, I think we have a full house. Are there any declarations of interest? And can I take on the minutes of the previous meeting, are these a true and accurate record of the previous meeting? Are there any matters that people want to mention from that? Agreed? Yeah. All right, fantastic. So before we get started, are there any questions, updates about the action log? No? Okay, fantastic. So the first item today, a little bit of confusion on what this is. I know what it's gone out in all the papers that this is a call-in for the traffic management order, but I understand this is no longer the case. So I'm just going to pass over to Paul Gary to explain kind of just the situation around that.
Thank you, Chair. That's correct. It was a call-in when the initial call-in request was made, and our Democratic Services team agreed it was a call-in. However, due to the time gap between the call-in being made and the Christmas break and this meeting happening, the traffic order we hope to implement would have lapsed. So although the decision made was called in, we can't implement the decision anyway. So that's why it's not a call-in. However, we felt it was worthwhile still discussing and debating the issue, because the intention was always to do another reconsultation in the new year anyway. So this is in effect another pre-decision discussion on the traffic management arrangements for All England's championships for 2023. So I think we should still debate and go through those issues because they are quite serious issues.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, yeah, I think from going through the corner, because we haven't had a proper, as I say, run up into discussing this item because it has been framed as a call-in, the focus was on if anyone has anything they want to raise from the recommendation, any changes that the council has done subsequently. Before I'm going to get into that, I'm going to just pass over to Steve and just say a few words about what the situation is.
Thank you, Chair. So whether a call-in or a pre-decision, we have some information for you tonight, and that is the reasons for my decision. Also, the purpose of the call-in, which was a presumption in favour of openness, and the issues of consideration of the evaluation of alternatives. I can go through those two issues today so that we can put them to one side. So on the presumption in favour of openness, it's all on the website. We've been in discussions on this. It's been happening for the last 18 months to 2 years. And for 6 months, there's been a discussion with residents as well. The reason for the decision is this information and advice from the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Policing Department, and where the calling was all about, are there any alternatives? No. As Cabinet Member for Transport, there are no alternatives to a response and a letter and advice from the Metropolitan Police about terrorism threats. And I'd like to refer to the letter from the Metropolitan Police dated both the 11th of May 2022, and there was one for the previous temporary order 9th of June 2022 and 11th of May 2022, and that talks about the borough being visited by an extra 500,000 people over 13 days, and the police very, very firm in their advice following the 22nd of March 2017 terrorist attack occurred on Westminster Bridge in Parliament Square within the grounds of the Palace of Westminster, and the attacker drove a vehicle into pedestrians on Westminster Bridge. On the 3rd of June 2017, 3 attackers used a rented Renault panel van to attack pedestrians on London Bridge, and on the 19th of June 2017, a van was driven into pedestrians in Finsbury Park. Those are reasons for a decision to move on this issue. In terms of permanency, we can then concentrate on mitigating the impact on residents and making sure the order each year is run in such a way that the bus routes are feasible for residents as well, for users, and that we also remind people that they can walk and cycle to the championships as well. But from me tonight, it's all about the advice from Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Policing Unit. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Now, this would be the point that I would invite reflections from those who called in, the three councillors in the village, but none of them are here this evening, so they have to put their points forward. But are there any reflections in the room or recommendations on some of the thoughts around that? Dan, if I could pass over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's quite an interesting issue. I mean, we've got to take a heed of the security services advice, but it seems like all or nothing. Is there any other third way compromise sort of option that could be feasible that will not be so detrimental to residents? You know, it did stir up a lot of passion in the village and also across the boundary into Southfields, and they feel put out. So there needs to be a way to manage that and find a way through.
Stephen?
We can install bollards for every day of the year to take account of 3 weeks use. But obviously we don't want to do that. It'll impact on the character of the area, but I'll pass over to Paul McGarry.
Thank you, councillors. So yeah, so in the Colin reports, we have set out further alternative options. I mean, frankly, when the Metropolitan Police write to the council and say there's a terrorism threat, the road should be closed, we have to take that very seriously. The threat is from hostile vehicle attacks. Not that there's been any intelligence to say that would happen. However, with the makeup, you know, there's lots of pedestrians using Church Road, crossing Church Road from the parking and the queue into the grounds. So even if you just use bollards to protect the footway, that still doesn't protect people crossing the road constantly. And we know there's a lot of activity there. As an urban design team as well, we felt that installing bollards to the length of Church Road would be detrimental to the streetscape for most of the year, and it is a conservation area, and for an event that's 2 weeks of the year, that felt overkill. And the benefit of doing this by experimental order meant we could monitor the effectiveness of those measures, see how it works, see the impact on residents before finally making the decision which was recommended. If I may, can I explain the difference between the different traffic orders, which leads into what we're about to do next, because it explains why we've been trialling this with the All England Club. So normally when the council makes any changes to the streets, roads or traffic, we have the legal power to do that. We would do that through a traffic order, and that would be a 21-day consultation, notice in the press, and we implement the changes. And we would ask people's views before we make the changes. Based on the advice we have from the Metropolitan Police around planning for Wimbledon Tennis, we didn't quite know how effective the changes would be, so we introduced under an experimental order. What that means is we put it in as a trial, let people experience the changes for good and bad. Allows us a chance to monitor the traffic impact around it, and we did that with the All England Club. So we provided the data in the pack for members tonight, and that showed whether there was an impact on traffic, on buses and cyclists, and actually found that the impact was not significant compared to the risk and safety we're trying to deal with as well. So as ever with the council, we're trying to balance the needs of residents and their views, but Wimbledon Championships is a global event and we have to take safety seriously. So the intention was, with an experimental order, we wanted to make amendments to it because residents have given us a good feedback about how the road closures could work better. And the process for the council would be, you've got to make an order permanent, then amend it. And now we can't do that because of the time lapse. So what we're planning to do in February is consult with a fresh traffic order, which wraps up what happened in the experiment and the changes that residents have asked for as well. And that'll be starting in February, and that'll be for the next year's championships.
Brilliant, thank you. Anthony, can I pass it to you, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've got a small number of questions, some of which I suspect are for Paul, but possibly some for Stephen. The first is the two letters from the police they actually ask for a temporary anti-terrorism traffic regulation order, and I wondered if there is actually any difference in substantive terms between those orders and a TMO, permanent TMO. So that's my first question. My second question is, was there any correspondence with the police that prompted these letters, or did these letters come unprompted? And I was also interested in the measures outside Wimbledon Station and Wimbledon Theatre, which I don't know if they were done under similar advice. I think they certainly were done under similar advice. I don't know if they were done with similar powers. I don't remember there being any consultation. This suggests there's a degree of discretion that the council have, and I wondered if the cabinet member had any comments on that. So 3 questions there.
Great, thank you. If you could just move your mic just a bit closer to you, that'd be great as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the actual, so there is a difference there. So traffic management orders the council can make. We implement them. The actual is actually issued by the Metropolitan Police. And in fact, that is in the background. It's an extra layer of security. So what the actual does is it gives the police the authority to close the road if they have to. Whereas the council's traffic order allows us to consult and engage and notify people before. Where the Met Police may use an actual is usually in the event of an incident where a road has to be closed immediately. So the powers are with the police and us. In relation to the counter-terrorism bollards at Wimbledon Station and Wimbledon Theatre, it is slightly different. They were prompted by the police. The police wrote to us, the council, about crowded places where people may gather, and actually it's commonplace around London now that most train stations have those bollards, at least to the entrance. So the station is very much identified at a London-wide level that mainline train stations are protected, and the theatre was identified as a crowded place with people coming in and out and congregating in front of the theatre. So it was on the advice of the police that we've done that. The reason the Wimbledon Town Centre has the permanent bollards is those facilities are used day in, day out, whereas the Wimbledon Championships is used for 2 weeks of the year. So it has a different approach to it.
Is there anything, Stephen, you wanted to add to that?
No, I don't want to add to what Paul McGarry said with regard to the letters to Hannah Doody and before that to Jed Curran. They're both before my time.
So I was going to say that still is my question unanswered as whether is the answer we're not aware that there was any prompting from Merton to the police or any correspondence before these letters came? Did they just come unprompted?
Yeah, so they weren't prompted by the council in any way, but what happens with the council every year is we work with the All England Club to manage the event management of the championships. That has ranged for years around parking control. Traffic controls come in the last couple of years. So the police are in that advisory group with the council. So any street event that happens in the borough, we have a safety advisory group. So the police are in there. So it wasn't prompted by the council, but the police clearly have their views. The other thing relating to the counter-terrorism, which is now different now, is whilst we took this decision based on advice and mitigating risk, coming up this year and in the wake of the review of the Manchester Arena attacks, local authorities and event organisers will now have a legal duty to protect. So actually what we've been doing is good practice in terms of church roads. That will become a legal necessity going forward. So it puts us in the front foot, but unfortunately, that's the world we're in sometimes, and we have to mitigate against risk. And we do understand that does inconvenience residents in some places. But we know that for Wimbledon Championships, it's a very temporary event.
Great, thank you. Martin, you had a question.
Thank you. I probably would just like to firstly add that as the first cabinet member that signed an order for the experimental order 2 years ago when we first implemented this, I think for the 2021 Wimbledon Championships. I also understand it was closed during the 2012 Olympics when Wimbledon was a venue. My question obviously is in relation to the responses. I was looking through them. Would it be true to say that more predominantly came from the Southfields, looking at where they are being tracked? Because I'm quite interested in the geographical breakdown. And obviously I'm also correct in saying that residents do have access to the other roads which are included within the order. So local residents, have full access. Is obviously just Church Road, which is impacted, and Church Road doesn't actually have any residential houses on that stretch of road or other businesses besides, I think, the Wimbledon Club, which I think is closed during the championships. It's just that points could be clarified.
Thank you.
Certainly, and thank you, Councillor. Yes, in the report pack, we do have a breakdown of where the responses came from. 50% of the responses came from Merton, 48% from Southfields. We said Wandsworth in the report, but we'll get a map that shows, and it's largely Southfields. It is important to say that although we say road closure, it's not fully closed. It's open in the mornings, it's open at night once tennis is played, it's open during the night. It's a soft closure while the tennis is on. It's correct to say that Church Road doesn't have, well, in the grounds of the tennis area, doesn't have any residential properties on it. And where residents are within the affected roads, they do get a permit issued by All England Club. So residents still have access to their homes. It's just that they get through a security checkpoint to get there. So really it cuts out through traffic. Residents still have access to their homes, and the safety is still there. So we feel it's a reasonable situation for the council to promote.
Daniel, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Point of clarification, please. With this power, when it takes effect, what would be allowed to go down that section of Church Road during the affected hours? So there was some apprehension out there in the public that it would be anybody who doesn't have a ticket for the event, so including pedestrians and cyclists. Could you outline exactly who would know who and what can still get down there?
So what's happened over the past two championships? So the experimental order lasted 18 months, which allowed us to cover two championships. The first one was during COVID, so it had less patronage to the grounds, and then last year's was a full championships. Although the road is closed to vehicles and through traffic, it has always remained open to pedestrians and cyclists, whether they have a ticket or not. So if you want to walk from Southfields to Wimbledon Village, you still can. We've stopped vehicle access, but people can still walk through it. So it's not a privatised street for the event. We just stop vehicles accessing
it. Great, thank you. Anthony? Oh, sorry, I think it was Stephen first. Sorry, I didn't see him. Yeah.
Thank you. It was directly on that point that I wanted to make a comment, which was that since we have an enthusiasm for active travel in Merton, it seems trivial, but given that you're able to get through this area by bicycle or on foot, perhaps we should even be considering promoting the fact that you're able to get through on bicycle or on foot, and it actually means that you're able to get throughout the borough of Merton on bicycle or on foot, going through there even through the period of the championships. I noticed in the notes that there was some comment about some electric bicycles accumulating at some point, and that's perhaps something you can consider for your next time round, particularly given that you have now introduced a new electric bicycle scheme, because it would be a very great temptation to get an electric bicycle on the electric bicycle scheme and cycle it through there if you want to have easy way to get through, particularly now we're providing the electric bicycles. But I thought it was something that we can perhaps be a little bit more positive about, is that you are able to get down this road. It's not completely blocked, you just have to walk or cycle.
Thanks, Stephen. Anthony.
Thank you. A slightly different point. Page 107 of the papers is a set of emails between Merton Council and the ALTC, whereas it looks like the ALTC have been given early sight of the consultation responses and the opportunity to input into the cabinet members' report. I just wondered if that was common practice with an event promoter, to be allowed to input into the cabinet members' decision pack before he or she has made it. I assume it is because it happened on this one, but it'd be good to have the confirmation that that in fact was the case.
Paul to answer that.
Thank you, Councillor. So it wasn't the case that All England had advanced sight of our reports. What those emails relate to is we know that through the experimental order, some residents would have contacted the All England Club with comments. We were making sure that if any had gone to All England, they come to us, we got all the feedback. More so as well, because All England Club were issuing the permits out to residents. So I think the basis was making sure that we had all the feedback. Secondly, it was All England who commissioned consultants to do the traffic counts and testing, and we were talking in emails about that as well, so that we could get that information over to us.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you. In the light of that, might I bother the panel to read out an email of the 22nd of November, 1555. This is page 107 from an account at Merton, which says, would you, and this is to the ALTC, would you please respond to each of the 17 objection categories and address the issues raised? Your responses will be used in a report to the lead cabinet member. A response to the positive comments would also be appreciated. I hope the panel can understand why that seems to me to look like, especially the sentence above is please find attached a summary of the objections, comments to the experimental scheme. So you can appreciate why my reading of that is that the ALTC were in fact given a summary of the consultation responses, asked to respond to those consultation responses, and notified that their responses would be added to the cabinet member's decision pack so that the cabinet member could make his decision, which looks to me like the ALTC were given the opportunity to influence the cabinet member in his or her decision. The description we've just had is that that's not the case, but I hope panel members can see why I might think differently.
Paul, do you want to respond to that? Oh, sorry.
So Mitra is going to respond to that. She deals with these.
Okay, I think possibly the email, some of the words that you used might imply that, but what happened was obviously All England Club have been working with the council, helping us actually in, they did a door-to-door engagement, so they had that direct feedback from the residents. Some of the residents, actually quite a fair number of residents, were also contacting them directly, so they had the information that we didn't have. They were on site on a daily basis, managing all the various restrictions so they could see what the issues are. So what we had to do is we kind of use them as a consultant. So we reached out to them and they didn't give them the exact word by word of every representation. We gave them the theme and we just wanted the information. In fact, if you read the report, we did the text that the All England Club provided. We didn't put it in chapter and verse as we received it. We used that information to make sort of have an understanding of what happened and to be able to respond to those themes. So that's how it was used. It certainly was not used to influence what officer's recommendation was going to be or influence what the cabinet member's decision was going to be. Ultimately, it was about the objective is to make sure that the whole area is safeguarded in terms of safety and access. We had objections, certain issues were raised which we're not aware of, but All England Club was. So we kind of asked for some assistance, which they provided. And then we based our recommendation based on a whole host of things, a number of factors. But ultimately, right at the start of this meeting, like Paul said, it is purely down to doing this because of the risk, the high risk to not just the visitors, but to the residents as well.
Great, thank you. Does that answer your question, Anthony?
It does, subject to a final comment, if I may. I'll read out the reply to that email from the ALTC on the 24th of November at 15:37. Please see attached our responses to the objections, stroke comments to the ETMO. I trust these are clear and useful, but if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, I appreciate the ALTC may have had information that had been given to them by residents, but that's not what this exchange of emails says. This exchange of emails appears to say, this is what our consultation response shows, what is your response to that? And we will put that in the report to the cabinet member. And the report to the cabinet member, of course, is what they base their decision on. The answer, I think, as far as I can understand it, is that it is not normal practice for companies organising events to be given the opportunity to directly input into the report that goes to the cabinet member. And yet, it seems to me that that is perhaps what this exchange of emails shows. And I find that a little concerning, I have to admit.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's possible, Gav, for the final word on this, and then we might move on after that. So, Paul, if I could pass to you.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the final word there is one that was mentioned earlier, which is interpretation. I think reading emails out of context, you could make them say whatever you want. Fundamentally here, the council is the traffic authority. We make decisions based on officer feedback. We have been in partnership with All England here because it's been an experiment, and we have had to find out information from them for us to make our recommendations as officers to the cabinet member. In my view, there's nothing underhand there. But also as a traffic authority, we see that the traffic order and what it's trying to achieve is absolutely about ensuring the safety of visitors and people in that area during a major events. And actually it's necessary now that the road closure is there because of what we've heard from in the police and what is coming our way in terms of the protect duty. So I accept the points, emails can be read anyway. I didn't expect we'd be here tonight trolling through sentences on emails rather than the reasons for the calling.
Great, thanks, Paul. Well, are there, or is it just a quick point, because I think we'll move on to, okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. There are concerns expressed by the village councillors, and that's why they did the call in. I think they'd appreciate if you could arrange a meeting on site with the cabinet member and Paul McGowan, if that's possible, please.
Yes, I'm happy to meet the Wimbledon Village councillors on site with Paul and discuss the issues with councillors affected by this issue, the Wimbledon Village councillors. And can I just say that a lot of issues are brought to a cabinet member's attention, not just to me, but to any cabinet member as they come to take a decision. And on this occasion, I've started this way and I'll finish this way. The primary reason for the decision, primary reason, is the advice from the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Policing Department, and as Paul McGarry has hinted and said, that following the Manchester Terrorism Act, the fact that it's a virtual legal implication and a legal necessity for local authorities to undertake these actions. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. So are there any recommendations from the panel on this item?
This is for information, sir. There's no need for recommendations.
Well, it was a pre-decision. I wasn't taking if there was any further things anyone to say, but if there's none, then I'll draw it to a close. Maybe something visited later. But if I can now move on to the budget discussions. And so if I can invite Billy to speak first on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to say a few words. I'm happy to be here to discuss the business plan updates from the October and December cabinet meetings, including the relevant parts of the £3 million in revenue growth that we're putting into our cost of living budget, and also this round of savings proposals. As this is my first budget process as the cabinet member, I'm extremely grateful to the directors, to Roger and to Adrian and their teams. I've seen all the hard work that has gone into this process, the many rounds of proposals, challenge meetings and researching, never mind the formal scrutiny meetings such as this one. So as a result, I'm extremely confident that these budget updates, growth proposals and savings proposals are robust, reasonable and sustainable. But clearly I didn't come into politics to make savings to the council's budget. Yet, unfortunately, in the environment we're in, with the severe financial constraints we're facing from the government, it is regrettably necessary that we take these steps to ensure we bring forward a balanced and sustainable cost of living budget in March. So, Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions and thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. If I can now pass over to Roger Kershaw to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, members will have before them tonight reports on the from the October and December Cabinet paper outlining the medium-term financial strategy position. And those reports will also have included growth and savings, of which you will have details in your packs tonight, including equality impact assessments for those savings, and those savings you will be scrutinising tonight with a view to passing on your comments to the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, which will be meeting on the 25th of January. Of course, what we've had in the meantime is a report to Cabinet in January with regards to further savings and a balanced budget reposition, which Overview and Scrutiny will be have an opportunity to reflect on and to comment on. The position that you have before you tonight is the December position, largely, and you can see at that time we still had a gap in the budget for 23-24 of some 4.3 million. We had benefited from some gains in terms of the increased council tax base and the reversal of the government's decision to increase national insurance for contributions for social care levy, and that gave us a gain. We also benefited from some good returns from our pension funds investments, the impact on the council being that it reduced our employers' national insurance contributions, so we saved 0.5% on that, which was positive. As Councillor Christie has outlined, we also put in some revenue growth within this period and some new savings, of which you will scrutinise now. So there's a fair bit of detail in the report, but I suspect you'll be anxious to get on to commenting and scrutinising the savings which are in your packs. So although I'm happy to take some questions, I'm going to leave you to get on with that particular piece of work, Chair.
Thank you very much. And if I just pass over to Adrian just to add any words on particulars on any part of what was before us today.
No, Chair. I'll leave that to my colleague.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, so just to give an indication how we're going to be taking these, we're going to be first taking some general comments on the pack, any reflections on that. We'll then be moving on to discussion of the growth proposals, and then finally onto the savings after that. And just to reiterate what Roger and Billy have said, that we'll be focusing discussions on the December on our papers, and the things that have come out in January, they will be going forward to Overview and Scrutiny next week, so we won't be discussing those here. So if I can invite any thoughts, reflections on just generally on what was in the papers on the proposals. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very general point, but I think a very important one. I'm very fortunate in that my business has been doing reasonably well for the last couple of years. And when the issue of inflation came up, we addressed with our staff what we were going to do about it fairly upfront, and to reassure them that they wouldn't be jeopardised and their earnings compromised in any way by the level of inflation. If I was a Labour cabinet member who was looking at the budget, and I had to talk to a member of staff in the council about pay when they're facing 11% inflation, and say, well, we're giving you 6%, I would feel embarrassed. I'm sure you do. It's a very difficult position. You have every sympathy. But if that staff member said, well, I know times are hard, and so I'll do what I can understand. But what are we going to do next year? Because I understand it's going to be 5% inflation next year. And then I was told, well, we're going to give you 3% next year. So we're 5% behind this year, 2% next year. I'm not saying there's any magic solution. You guys have obviously looked at all the numbers, but I would be very embarrassed. And I don't know the details of arranging pay at council level. I know that there are national agreements and all sorts of things which affect the pay that you're able to give. But if I was you, I would do everything you can to give them more than the minimum, because I'm not hard up, but people who work for the council are. And I know that's at the heart of what you guys believe in, but I think it's terrible.
Thank you. Maybe I can invite.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the point you raised. And, you know, I would say that in principle, I absolutely agree. I think that all public sector workers should be receiving decent pay settlements given the situation with inflation. But you know, it's a difficult position. You alluded to the pay settlement that has been agreed. It obviously applies to Merton Council staff, but it's a nationally negotiated position across the local government sector. So it's not particularly a Merton settlement. It just also applies to Merton staff. And what I would say as well is that whilst it amounts to an average of 6% across the board, it is actually a sort of fixed amount increase. So whilst it averages to 6%, it's actually effectively a larger percentage increase for those employers on the lower pay bands. And what we have also been clear about is that, you know, the administration has taken a lot of steps to help residents during the cost of living crisis. We've run a number of events. We've set up a special emergency fund, and we've been providing all measure of supports to residents, but we've been very clear that we also want to support our staff during the cost of living emergency. And so we've run a number of events for staff to highlight all the various support measures that are available for them during this sort of difficult time. So I completely sort of sympathise and don't disagree with the points you make, but I just wanted to provide that additional context, and I don't know if the director would like to add anything.
Adrian, would you like to add?
Nothing else from me.
Anthony.
Thank you. Two general points, if I may. One is a question more for you, Chair, is am I to understand that you were not going to allow us to discuss the latest savings that were proposed? You're not going to allow any discussion of that tonight?
Yes, so those weren't circulated in advance to members, so there's an unlevel playing field for those who haven't had a chance to scrutinise those. They will, however, be being discussed at the meeting next week at the Scrutiny Commission. I mean, I'll be there to take reflections. I know your colleagues and stuff will be there as well. So that'll be the time we're going to share a proper discussion with everyone being informed on the same page, rather than here where we are right now, where there's an unlevel information.
I think we're giving the OV and Scrutiny Commission a rather big job when they next meet, and they'll have a lot to cover, which I think is a shame. But if you're making it clear that you won't allow us to discuss those, that's helpful. I may write to you separately with some points to feed into that debate when it comes. My point more generally was the job of scrutiny of the budget by the panels is to understand how the budget proposals reflect the priorities of the administration and the cabinet members. So I wondered if I might invite the two cabinet members whose responsibilities report to this panel, who are here tonight, to comment on how the budget proposals as set out in this paper reflect their priorities, if that would be allowed, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It's a good question. Thank you for letting me highlight the growth bid that we've made, and it has hopefully go through, and I hope you all don't try and block it. So we have put in a bid around sorting out flats above shops, which I've been part of this panel. Dan and yourself have been part of this panel for a long time, and it's just been an issue for many people who live in flats above shops, and the kind of disjointed way that service works. What we're proposing to do is put in a bid to standardise those time bands and to have to bolster the comms for those flats. We want to be able to put on 2 time-banded collections every single week, so that those that they have, they basically have more collections because they have fewer, they have less space for storage. But we want to make it easier for them to do the right thing. So on a quarterly basis, we'll be trying to send out the recycling bags through the door with a special letter saying this is when your time bands are, because as we know, people who live in these properties tend to be quite a transient population. So we want to make sure the information is constant. And then it makes it easier for us to enforce any behavior that isn't right, because we want to be very clear to help people do the right thing, and to make it so clear that it's easy to do the right thing. So yes, that's a priority for my area, and it definitely reflects the work of myself and the officers in my portfolio.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for giving me this opportunity to speak about how proud I am to be the Cabinet Member for Transport under our new leader in Ross Garrett. As the Leader of the Opposition will see from the Honours Board, I've been the Leader of the Council for 10 years, and therefore a budget is agreed by the full Cabinet and by the Labour councillors in its various stages, and we're going through those stages. And so my strategy and my work seeps through the budget line by line, and allows me to promote active travel, allows me to promote the air quality in the borough, and allows me to have an EV strategy that will get us to 2030. So I'm very proud of this budget so far.
And well, I think I would invite. Yeah. Okay. So Andrew's temporarily with us, so he can't take, but he will be coming back. So maybe you can speak to those priorities then. Are there any other general thoughts, reflections on the papers? And if not, then I might well take discussion into discussion on the growth proposals that are in the business plan. So there are any thoughts on anything that's been suggested there? James.
Yeah, I'd like to ask officers, did the pilot scheme on waste collections from flats demonstrate that fly tipping has been reduced? And has the number of complaints about fly tipping declined?
Would this be one for John?
Thank you very much. In terms of the project that we have been doing for determining the best way to collect waste from these locations, the evening economy is that we have been piloting is demonstrating that streets are much cleaner at the beginning of the day. We are collecting between 4 to 8 tons of material across the borough each evening that has been placed out inappropriately. So those events, if calculated as fly tipping, pardon me, calculated as fly tipping incidents, it has phenomenally decreased the level of fly tipping across the borough in terms of gross numbers. In terms of the impact with residents in the functionality of receiving the regular recycling bags through their door, we've yet to determine that. We still deliver it in the old-fashioned way, but we're looking forward to giving more regular bags to residents in an easy, convenient way where they can access that, therefore recycling more material and having that ability to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions on that, Anthony?
Thank you, and thank you for the Cabinet Member for highlighting that particular growth proposal. I think this was one of the pilots that came out of the work that was done largely last year. A quick question on that one: Will that include all shops above flats or only certain parades? And secondly, I know another of the pilots that came out of that was the weekly street sweeping, which I understand for the time being is only rolled out in part of the borough. But obviously that's not down here as a growth proposal, and therefore can I just clarify that, well, that is not continuing, or is it continuing, and is it being extended to the whole borough?
So on the first question, sorry, what was the first question again?
Is it all flats above shops, or is it just?
Yes, so yes, it is. And the way it will work is that there's the schedule zone the borough basically into two halves, and we do one half one part of the week, and then you'll flips the other. And I hope to be able to share those routes and timetables with the people that live there and with yourselves, because it'll be good for your residents to know as soon as we've ready to launch the pilot. It should be Q1 this year that we'll be able to start doing that. So there'll be more to update you, and obviously happy to come back and discuss more about the results of it once we get it going. On the second question around, well, there are weekly street sweeping routes. There always has been. What happened through the action plan that we got from Veolia after we did the SIN notice is they increased the amount of weekly beat sweeps. Now that's part of the SIN process. It wasn't additional, and it was part of them reprofiling to answer the criticisms that we put to them. So the part of their solution to that was to reprofile some of the most dirty streets and to give them more regular sweeping. So that's remaining. And as we go forward and look at the spec for the new service that will come to this panel, we'll hope to now that we know what that now that we know what is necessary, we'll hope to make that business as usual for more areas of the borough. At the moment, it's focused on the hotspots and the areas that were particularly brought out through the SIN. So we don't have everyday street sweeping for every single street, just for where it's very, very necessary.
Great, thank you. So Dan, have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Question on the building development control growth. Is one officer sufficient to meet your aspirations to improve that service? And would it be more as prudent to have an extra planning? Because looking at the stats later on in the performance monitoring, it would indicate that planning and building control would need more resource.
Who'd be best placed to speak to that?
I mean, you're correct, Councillor. We are looking at the staffing arrangements for development management and building control, and they've taken on a sizable number of additional staff. Part of what you're referring to in terms of the savings is that if we can bring in people on within the growth element, then we will increase our income in pre-applications in the savings element.
Great, thank you. James.
I don't think I got an answer from John about the second part of my question, unless my hearing is impaired. I asked, has the number of complaints about fly tipping declined? I don't remember getting an answer to that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. In terms of the overall complaints about fly tipping, the information in terms of the raw numbers of fly tipping incidents are within the performance information that we'll review at a later date. In terms of the annual figures, they still remain high in terms of what the public are reporting. My answer, and I'm sorry it didn't clarify that point, was that the evening economy crew, which is the pilot for this growth bid, is able to mitigate a large number of potential complaints that may be forthcoming. But until we have more information over the annual numbers, I wouldn't be able to precisely determine those numbers at this moment. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, thank you. General question on the park and services group item. Could one of the officers actually explain what's going on there and what's that meant to be? Because I wasn't particularly clear from reading it.
Who'd be best placed?
So what's that question, sir?
It was on the parking services and what the item is about. Adrian, would that be something for you?
Are we referring to the residents and visitor parking permits?
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor, thank you. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Protection. I'm responsible for the parking service. I'm not entirely sure what point you're making on that. If you could just...
Just a clarification on more what's actually going on in that item. Is it 650 of new income or new permits, or what exactly is it? It wasn't particularly clear what's going on.
It's lots of income.
I've been a member for transport. So there's an issue as between visitor permits and resident permits. And what's happened is because of COVID in particular, the level of sums coming in from people moving away from visitor permits to resident permits hasn't happened. So there's a structural gap in the budget of 650,000, primarily as a result of COVID, which is happening throughout all of London and throughout the country. So rather than keep coming back year in, year out with this gap, we're going to plug it because it's a structural gap that won't go away. So we're putting in growth of 650,000 so we can move on from that battle between visitor permits and resident permits.
Can I ask about the resident permits? Based on a point sample, i.e. me, I haven't had any temporary parking permits at all for people to park outside my house since the system was changed from a physical paper simple permit one where you scratched out a day and put it in the car to one in which people had to use their phones and select it. It's a very simple point, but I wonder if you've any idea the extent to which the drop in income coincided with the change in parking systems.
Just to answer that.
No, it's as Councillor Embrus has said, what we find actually are people are more likely to use the digital solutions now. That's certainly the data that we have. Whilst we always know there will be customers who don't want to use those, and we will always provide a facility for them, actually our view is that we're going to move to as many virtual permits as possible, and all of our planning will reflect that.
Thank you. And yeah, as someone who's used the digital permits on many occasions, I found them very useful and very handy. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. And coming back to Dan's question, really, I suspect I'm just being particularly dense here. And thank you to Stephen for the reply, but I'm afraid I still didn't quite understand it. I understand that there isn't as much money raised by visitor permits as expected because of the switch over to residence permits or the scratch cards. This has come through as a growth proposal. Now, we don't normally expect increased spending. On the face of it, that looks like less money coming in, so less income coming in, rather than more money being spent. But is that merely how this comes up in the budget, how that displays itself in the budget? It's actually accepting that less money will come into that income stream.
Yeah, I can pick that one. Yeah, that's exactly how we do it. If we have reduced income, it comes in as a growth bid. Yeah.
Great. Are there any final comments on any of the growth proposals? And if not, then I'll move on to the savings proposals. Any reflections, thoughts, questions on the savings proposals? Dan.
I was wondering if officers could clarify the difference between the qualities impact assessment figure for I'm talking about the service charge for green spaces with Altec and the use of their green spaces. The qualities impact assessment says that we've made £375,000 on this, and in the baseline budget protection it says 229. So I was wondering if officers could clarify the distinction.
Who would be best placed to speak to that?
Thank you very much, Chair. With my apologies, I don't directly have the papers in front of me for this information. We have had a higher than projected income for this activity, but that was a contractual matter, and we're at the end of that contract period. and we will have to be extending that contract period. So it's still for the forthcoming year, so we'll be open to negotiation. So we've yet to estimate what that impact will be from a budgetary perspective.
Great, thank you. I mean, I also just noticed that Andrew has joined us online. So I might just turn to you, Andrew, very quickly. One of the questions we had earlier was just for the cabinet members, each of the cabinet members, to speak to just generally kind of the proposals in the papers. So I was wondering maybe if you just have a moment to just reflect on and speak to some of the proposals that are before us today.
Right, okay. Let me see. So you want me to touch on growth as well?
Yeah, I think more just generally, we're discussing growth right now, but just as you weren't here before, just think a general reflection on growth savings, the whole sort of package.
I think we're at a unique moment actually in the history of Merton Council, because what is being produced for you is a balanced budget not only for this year and for this coming year and for the following year as well. And from my perspective, that reflects very well on the officers, particularly Roger, who's been guiding this process, on Billy Christie as the cabinet member. Actually, the items in my area of the cabinet responsibility are relatively limited. I think there are necessary changes to, for instance, in terms of growth, to the building control process in the borough. We believe we have increased responsibilities in terms of legislation for building and fire safety. So we need growth there in that building control area. And it is partly a safety issue, as is clear from the explanation on, I think, page 11 of the proposals. In terms of empty homes, we have a significant number of properties in the borough which are empty and for which there is no rational explanation. So that if the owner of the property was acting in a rational way, they would either use the property themselves or they would rent it out. And what we're looking at there is joining with other authorities, in particular Wandsworth, to try and make offers to individual property owners to help bring up those properties to a lettable standard. Very often it will be by making a capital contribution on the basis that for a period of years, let's say 5 years, they will let out that property as an affordable home. And it has been successful in Wandsworth, and we're seeking to ride on the back of that. So that's why it's referred to on page 13 as a regulatory shared service partnership. And we're looking at part admin support and an officer for that. There's a very significant increase in housing officers, again on page 13 at G11, for licensing, landlord licensing. So we're looking at a new team, effectively, of 9 full-time equivalents, including a manager to operate the licensing and enforcement functions. So this is where there's going to be a group of wards in the borough, based in the east on the basis of the data we have at the moment, where landlord licensing will be introduced. There will be a requirement for landlords to obtain a license to operate in those wards. And the monies paid by the landlords will enable the inspection of properties that are let out to ensure there are no category 1 or category 2 hazards there. And the scheme is expected in the end to be self-financing. So that perhaps reflects why there's only a 97,000 in the budget for the coming year. We are going through consultation at the moment. The consultation has not yet finished. I think it finishes on the 22nd. And if, having analysed the consultation responses, we think it's practicable to bring in landlord licensing, we're expecting to bring it in September of this year. But that will be a major change, really, in the way we handle let properties, and also it will affect HMOs in those wards, in particular those wards where there have been significant problems arising from some HMOs in terms of inappropriate accommodation, unsanitary accommodation, and antisocial behaviour arising from those properties. So those are growth items, but they're very important growth items. Now, just moving on to savings, if I can find the relevant pages. Well, it's not really a saving, but it's on page, I think, 22, that in terms of property management, we're looking at a net increase in rental income from commercial properties to align with a recovery across, I think the line says, to align with over recovery across various properties. It's basically, I think, increasing our rental income on those commercial properties. And we're looking at development control, which is the line below on page 22, at an increase in income from pre-application consultations with prospective applicants for planning permission. And I think that covers it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. I really appreciate that.
Thanks.
Dan.
Yeah, thank you to the Cabinet member for that. I want to switch back to the savings thing. I have a general question to whoever may want to answer it. All the savings seem to have a low risk of deliverability, but when I look at some of the numbers, I begin to question, is that really true? So, for instance, is the green spaces saving to find another 60k of income when that's a third of an increase? How realistic is that? I mean, can it be delivered? Realigning budgets for leisure and culture, of asking the leisure centres to pay more in this current financial climate, again, is that realistic? Then there was one on maintenance, repairs, and for Wimbledon Fortnight as a result of that. Again, is, are some of these realistic? Because I'm not so sure they are.
Oh, Adrian, would that be one for you?
Yes, thank you. I mean, in terms of the realigning of the budgets, increasing income target for the leisure contractors, this leisure contract has been in place since 2010, and there is a yearly management fee contained within the contract, and this increases by RPI and X whatever the interest is on the 1st of January each year. In addition, there is a profit share element. However, this was not applied by the council during the COVID period. But since the end of lockdown, the council has supported GLL with their business improvement proposals, which has seen an increase in their business. And obviously, leisure services will now be seeking full payment of the management fee from GLL and any profit share element in line with the contractual arrangement. One of the things to note in the performance that we'll come on to later this evening is that the attendance at the leisure centres has dramatically increased, and is testament, one, to the borough of sport and people wanting to get back active and fit and healthier. So they do correlate there. In terms of the increase in fireworks income, as we know, following the continued commercial success of the annual fireworks event in Wimbledon Park and Malvern Park, with year-on-year increases in the income generated by this event, the public space team feel confident that they can develop further improvements in income generation during the annual event. The service is conscious that significant increases to ticket prices does have an impact on communities who enjoy this activity, and we have endeavoured to maintain a high quality offer with acceptable ticket pricing for visitors. To keep pace with the cost of external providers and event management, there was a price rise implemented in 2022. However, with this in mind, we feel that we can increase the capacity of the sites and generate at least 500 people more at each of the events, increasing it by 2,000 ticket sales which would equate to a sizable amount towards the 60,000. There is also some thoughts about holding additional firework events or extending the fireworks to a third night to increase sales also. Sorry, Councillor, and you mentioned one other, I believe.
The other one was repairs to Wimbledon Park after the tennis fortnight, and whether that increase is enough to cover our costs. As we know, some years we spend a lot of money repairing our parks.
Which one is that?
That is on page 22. Service charge for green space during Wimbledon fortnight. There's an increase, but given the costs of damage repairs seem to go up, does that actually does that actually cover our costs and then putting it back right again? Because we know the public get very perturbed when events happen, and they always want to make sure things get repaired and when it's not actually costing us.
If you don't mind, if I could, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the question. In terms of ground repairs from events, that's something that we've greatly improved upon that to ensure that the numbers within the budget represent the net income following all costs associated to the activity. We've vastly improved over the last couple of years in terms of rectification of any damage to any of our grounds in our well-loved and valued parks, and whilst holding those activities. And that's something that we've inbuilt within those plans. So one that you reference in terms of the activity in Wimbledon Park supporting the championship period, we will receive a additional significant value that will help us ensure that we have secure grounds following any event. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Slavak.
Thank you, Chair. Under property management, commercial rental income increase. Can officers say more whether this will affect small businesses? And if so, how we will support them in light of the cost of living crisis? Thank you.
The council makes provision in its leases of commercial properties for rent to be reviewed. Any rent review is implemented in lines with the terms of the lease and with professional guidance. One thing we do, though, is work with tenants of the premises when we apply any increases to assist if we can in any way we can.
Great, Dan.
So I was wondering if I could go back to my question because I didn't really understand the answer. And it might be useful to have the documents in front of you. So on page 22, on the green space service charge for green space during the Wimbledon fortnight, in the column baseline budget 22-23, it says 229. Now I might just be a bit simple here, so please teach me. So it says 229 there, but then if you look at page 68 at the qualities impact assessment, it says the income is actually 375. So why is the baseline such a low figure, 229, as opposed to what the income actually is, 375? We could be accounting for much more money.
In terms of the structural budget, that was the previous annual settlement in terms of the overall investment in the 3 different parks from the All England. But we've had negotiation with the All England Club forthcoming, which has generated additional revenues to the park services for the use of those spaces, being Morden Park, Common Extension, as well as Wimbledon Park. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I might just ask just a quick question myself. I just wanted to ask about the dockless bike income and just ask how the 35,000 figure was reached and what the main expenses for the council are, what that money might be going towards.
Yes, Councillor. The Future Merton received approval from the procurement board when embarking on this in November 22 to enter into agreements with e-bike operators. The scheme, as you say, means operators enter into a contract with the council and pay a fixed fee of 35,000, which operates as a license for them to operate dockless bikes within the borough. That contract was signed in December 22. In terms of the fee, I'll hand over to my colleague Paul McGarry to just enlighten us further.
Thank you, councillors. Yeah, so the income fee is what's set in the contract with allowing the operators to come into the borough and provide those services to residents and use our highway. In terms of the officer cost, there isn't really cost, it's officer time and getting the contracting finished and working with the bike companies to identify locations for docking. Once that is done, it runs, but then we get an annual fee ongoing. We keep that under review because as the dockless bike hire takes off, there may be more and more bikes coming into the borough, so we'll keep that under review. But in terms of staff time, not huge expense.
And what is that reviewed on an annual basis then?
It should be annually. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anthony.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the saving on page 23, which is the business efficiencies and rationalisation saving. Similarly to Dan, that 85,000 saving out of a budget of 400,000 looks quite a large chunk to be saving in 1 year. But also I wondered about the timing of it. If it was possible to make those efficiency savings of that scale, why is it only possible to make them now when it hasn't previously been possible to make them?
Thank you, councillor. Obviously, the saving is a result of business efficiencies by rationalising the budget. A review was undertaken of supplies and service underspends in the directorate based on the 2021-22 actual spend and the current year 22-23 forecast spend. It was identified that as a result of smarter working and more home working, that printing, stationery and general office supplies and ancillary spend across the whole department could be reduced by the 85,000. I think home working has shown that certainly with the use of paper and printing, that's significantly gone down. And with people moving more to IT technology and using, whether it's the mobile laptops or the iPads or whatever, it significantly assists with any sort of office-based procedures.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions, Victoria?
I just wondered, are we going to be getting onto the capital programme at all? Or are we just doing growth and savings?
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if anyone else has any questions on the savings first. Mine's about the capital programme. So
Well, okay, well, maybe we can take those after we discuss the savings.
Yeah.
Dan.
I'll ask one question, but directed to officers, if I can be cheeky, or about two items. It's about benchmarking and just how we compare to other London boroughs. So we're increasing our rates for temporary traffic order incomes. Have we compared how much we're increasing our rates to compared to other London boroughs? Has that benchmarking been done? And also about on the commercial rental income, have we benchmarked against other London boroughs and how large are increases compared to other London boroughs?
Yeah, in terms of the temporary traffic orders, that's where we enable utility companies to go on and dig up the roads. We have benchmarked with the South West London boroughs. We upped our fees last year and we checked it again this year, which is why we're trying to capture that income as a city.
Anything else, Adrian?
Yeah, in terms of the commercial properties, I understand that we often consult with specialists in the field, as well as looking at other boroughs, but I don't know whether Paul can add anything to that.
Paul, did you want to add anything to what Adrian said?
So nothing to add.
No, no worries. Any other thoughts, reflections, questions? And if not, maybe Victoria, now's the time to ask a question.
thank you, Chair. So in the capital programme under appendix 27C, there's two lines about street trees. One just says street tree programme and the second is new street tree planting programme. I just wondered, does the maintenance of the trees is that all in the capital programme, or is that fall somewhere else as well? And does the new street tree planting programme, is that just to plant them again, or is that the maintenance afterwards? Just wondered how it all splits out basically.
And thank you very much for the question. In terms of street trees, with both of those lines, one preceded the other. So it's additional investment in the planting of trees. With all of the trees, we look at a whole cost over a 3-year period for establishment. So we have a full cost within our new contract with our service provider, and that looks at a whole cost over a 3-year establishment period for that asset. And then it becomes part of the normal asset, which would then be managed as part of the service. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So are there any final reflections on the budget that anyone wants to mention? Dan?
Yeah, on the capital budget, there's talk about Wimbledon, some regen works. Could you outline what is planned for those? And also there was on another page on Appendix 7B, it's more of a future years thing, but I noticed there's a fund for public realm improvements that goes from 50k up to 1.5 million. I was just wondering what's been planned in your mind, because it's quite a big jump, that is.
All right, who's best? Paul.
Councillor, I don't have the pack in front of me. So can you remind me, what was the regeneration one, the first one?
One second, just went to it. So it's on Appendix 7C. It says Wimbledon Village has some money being spent, 800,000. Not sure what that is, and also Wimbledon Public Realm implement, but then the rest of the word is cut off, and I was just wondering what that is. I've noticed you've almost finished with my one on Wimbledon Hill Road, so I'm very grateful for that, but I was just wondering what's happening next in those other two bits of Wimbledon.
Yeah, so those two schemes, the first one, Wimbledon Village Public Realm, that has been a SIL allocation from last year, so it's carried forward on the capital programme this year. There's been improvements to the village anyway in terms of the heritage lighting, but it's to repave and make some public realm enhancements to the village, principally around where the farmers market has taken off. So that's been agreed with the Wimbledon Village Business Group, and it's been part of an ongoing discussion. So it's not a new growth item, it's been in the SIL programme since last year, but rolled forward. The 1.5 million for public realm enhancements, that's through the administration's new Civic Pride Fund. There's not yet a programme for that, but the highway team are looking into that, and it's going to be things like refreshing signs and lines, road signs, zebra crossings, painting lamp columns. So some of it's quite janitorial in terms of upgrading public realm. Parts of it will also be rain gardens, investing in local shopping parades. So it's really trying to uplift the quality of some of the streetscape across the borough. So that'll be a multi-year programme, starting from when the budget gets approved.
Great, thank you. So any final last comments? Stephen, the final word.
Thank you. The risk of hammering on about something. If I'm signing off my accounts for my company, I have to be prudent when I'm signing them off. Dan mentioned earlier on the issue about how likely it was to stick with the numbers. I suspect the answer is it's not down to you, it's down to the local government settlement. But if you're looking at what's going to be happening in the back end of this year, 23-24, and you're going to only plan on paying 3% to people in a context of 5% inflation when they've taken a 5% hit, I would say that's not prudent. I would say expecting, in the context of all the strikes that are going on now and everything else, to expect that we're actually going to be able to hold to 3% when inflation around us is 5% isn't prudent. It's not realistic. If we have the freedom to make the forecast rate of pay higher than 3% when we're looking at it, I would encourage the cabinet member to do so.
Thank you, Chair. If I can pick that one up. I mean, obviously, as we've said, we're part of a national pay bargaining, so we don't have, as a local authority, control over that. But the 3% that's been provided in the budget is simply an indication that we've received through iterations from central government in terms of how they would like to see public sector pay, and we all know, some of the history around local government pay in that regard. But should that settlement actually be higher, you will note from the papers that we've also set aside a significant sum in something we call excess inflation. So we have been prudent, and if that's the pay settlement is higher than 3%, we have set aside sufficient resources within our excess inflation provision to meet whatever pay settlement is agreed nationally and will apply to Merton Council.
Thank you very much. Well, with that, I think I'll draw the end to the discussion on the budget process. I want to just thank Billy and Roger and Adrian for their work in putting it together. I think a fantastic job. So before we start on the next item, I'm going to now have a quick 10-minute break just for everyone to get a drink of water and go to the bathroom if they need to. When we come back, we're going to take the ID Verdi item first, and then we'll move on to the tree strategy discussion after that. So it is 8:37 right now, so we're back at 47 minutes past. All right, welcome back, everyone. So now we are moving on to discussion of ID Verdi. So if I could pass over to Andrew Kaufman to introduce the item.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Irons, I just wondered, do you want to do a little brief summary as you indicated, or would you like me to move on to the report?
So we're just going on to the discussion of ID Verdi's performance and the report from the Independent Green Spaces Forum. Well, just to say, I think that I still find the report from the Independent Green Spaces Forum helpful. Andrew and I have attended a couple of meetings with them, and it's really helpful to get their feedback and their perspective of what's going on. And as you know, they represent the friends groups in this borough that do a lot of work off their own back and take such pride in our parks. It's good to be able to work in partnership with them to try and keep our parks thriving. I do though see that ID Verdi are, from my perspective, I feel that they're improving, and that they're definitely opening up the communication channels in a good way. We still need to work on getting a digital platform that we can report things on in parks, but I think that I feel like there's been some progress in terms of their relationship with friends groups and their kind of responsiveness to issues that are raised. And I think as I walk around the borough and as I visit our parks, I think they're in pretty good condition, and I think that's down a lot to Zolt and his team, and Andrew and his team for managing the contract. But that's all I'll say, and I'll pass over to Andrew Kaufman now.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Irons. And again, yeah, I think, as I say, I certainly agree with the statement made with regard to the Independent Merton Green Spaces Forum. And as I say, yeah, as I say, certainly the last couple of events that I've attended, along with Councillor Irons and representatives from ID Verdi, as I say, it is nice to see the I suppose the improvement in communication, but it's also still nice to hear, and obviously to hear some scrutiny as well, obviously from the groups and the particular friends groups, and obviously the residents that they represent. So yeah, I'd just like to, with regard to the recommendations and the papers that were forwarded to the panel, obviously, yeah, just to note like the content. Again, it's certainly obviously the content of the report. I still would like to sort of obviously provide the panel opportunity to feedback to officers, particularly if there's any comments regarding their experience, or report any issues and things that have been received from constituents, obviously within their area, or from wider friends groups and stuff that are represented there. Certainly around the experience with regards to the parks and playground maintenance and cleansing, the highways verge maintenance, cemeteries maintenance, and the burial management, as well as the sports and allotment booking and income and management. I'd also ask to note the progress made actually by ID Verdi in supporting the council with some of its key strategic agendas, and particularly around things like climate change, as I say, so borough of sport, the civic pride, public health, and again, I'll come on to that later in the report. And there is a little bit of detail provided, but again, it's just really a snapshot of what's kind of going on at the moment. And I know a lot of that was relayed actually to our last Independent Merton Friends Green Spaces Forum meeting that we attended. So it's good to keep those channels open. And I'd also obviously note additional works and stuff that have been undertaken in partnership with the LBM sort of public spaces team. So both on a green spaces point of view, like waste and enforcement, and on leisure services. And I'll obviously come into that later into the report. Obviously, overview from sheet 1, obviously main purpose being to inform the panel with regard to the performance quality score for ID Verdi's performance over the contract period between January 22 and December 22, but also to note that in the tables provided that obviously we do a summary of performance within the previous financial year as well, and how that those actual scores correlate. Obviously, I think we're certainly made with regard to the progress made by the council and service providers relating to those added value services, which, as I say, come on to the end of the report. And then the last part of it, as I say, maybe some of those progress made on the cabinet recommendations made previously, And there's a number of documents there that I think relate to sort of points 2.8 to 2.18 in that last summary report. And I'll kind of break those down sort of point by point within the report. But again, maybe a little questions that come on to that later. Obviously, page sort of 2 to 4 is primarily around the performance management system that we are using, which is correlated like the monthly scores for the 2022 period against that of 2021. Obviously, I'd like to sort of draw the panel's attention to the graph on page 2, which relates to the overall park score. So that's obviously for each of the 12 months during 2022. And that's basically like an amalgamation of various operations that are carried out within that park during the particular point in the year that those inspections are carried out. So that would look at things like the grass cutting regime, shrub bed maintenance, hedge maintenance, leafing operations maybe during the the autumn period, as well as things like sort of sports pitch renovations. I think, as I say, certainly something to note to the panel over that 12-month period in 2022, that again, over that 12-month period, obviously the team at Ida Verde have performed within the agreed tolerance that's laid out in SP 515 within the contract documents. And now in 5, obviously 5 of those periods during that 12-month period, there's been a positive trend above 5, which is that that contract score. As I say, the next one, obviously, sort of to point the panel into is looking at the park's litter, and obviously, sort of since sort of January 2022, litter teams are performing well across the year. Obviously, are exceeding the corporate sort of tolerances, so above 5 in 7 out of those 12 months. And then finally, drawing the panel to the additional graph on that same page, which is related to the highways verge maintenance. Now, although the performance in that area obviously did see the greatest amount of variation, I think the gap difference needs to be noted just on the right-hand side of the table, which shows why there's such a great sort of difference in terms of those elements within the table. But just to point, obviously, to the performance target on that particular area, which is the achievement of a score of 4.5, and we're above that in all of the 12 months. Again, I'd just obviously point the panel to the particular issues and stuff experienced within the sort of the May and June period, which did relate to the verge team and a loss of a supervisor, a member of staff. But again, obviously sort of working with the robust sort of contract monitoring that we do on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, we were able to bring the performance back within a shorter period of time. And obviously the Ida Verde's commitment to delivering that and a delivery plan. And obviously we were talking to ward councillors in the particular wards where the grass was indicated, and I think Gap Road Cemetery was one of the areas of note where there was a real serious problem. But again, with the fact that we had that robust contract performance model, we were able to put obviously the necessary measures in place to rectify that within a good period of time. And I'd also like just to draw the panel's attention, particularly on like one of the climate action obviously performance things that we were looking at with regard to highways maintenance, and that is the adoption of the Merton Wild Ways initiative, which is part of a South London Waste Partnership scheme to look at trying to increase verge maintenance operations, to do it in a certain way that enhances both biodiversity, but it also provides residents with a nice view in relation to proximity to their properties. And that obviously I'd like to sort of note that the support that has been provided both by the Ida Verde team, working with our ecologist to find the most suitable locations, as well as working with the Ida Verde's RSPB business partnership, which we have actually been developing some initiatives, and we will see some meadow planting and stuff on a number of those highways, wildways this year. And just obviously I have put a link in obviously to the borough's website where it has the details about that. But at the moment, obviously in that first year, 2022, we have actually seen 11% allocation towards the wildways verge maintenance. And again, actually the feedback has been good that we've had in terms of residents in proximity locations. Although we did have one area that was expressed as a major concern, and that was a roundabout location. And obviously with discussions with the particular residents association and the ward councillors, that particular element was actually removed from Wild Ways and an alternative location found. I think the other element, again, obviously pointing the panel towards pages 5 to 11 inclusive, it provides a little bit more detail there about some of the other core elements within the grounds maintenance service provision under the Lot 2C contract. And that looks after cemeteries, management and maintenance within the Merson's 4 open cemeteries. And again, I've just sort of highlighting there in terms of the financial performance with regards to the actual sort of cemetery sites, and obviously the proactive work that Ida Verde, along with the Green Spaces team within Merton, as well as our board members from MSJC, to look at the ways that we are better engaging with the various funeral directors, and obviously some of the particular sort of groups that we do work with, much stronger relationship with the Muslim funeral service sector. As I say, so we have seen quite a major sort of requirement or request sort of linked to the MSJC contract. I'd also sort of point or link to page 7 to look at things like the sports, leisure management and maintenance. And again, I highlight there some of the design and implementation that we've had linked to some of the capital schemes that we've been delivering within the parks and open spaces. And we're having a free design service from Ida Verde UK to put the specifications of works together. And, in terms of talking to the capital team, in terms of the delivery of those projects, we're starting to see some really, really positive performance linked to some of the borough's open agendas. On page 8, I'd just like to obviously point the panel in with regard to allotment management and maintenance, and a particular project and things that we have been working with the Ida Verde team as well as the allotment associations, is making more of our unlettable plots available. And this year is the first year that we've brought over 59 new previously unavailable plots back into circulation. And I'm pleased to say that during the month of January, all of those sites that were cleared have actually been let to new tenants, which I believe is actually sort of quite a positive operation. And certainly when we look at the obviously situation a lot of families find themselves in, I think the more opportunities people have to kind of garden and grow their own, I think that really should be something that should be championed. I probably should highlight there as well that the addition of the allotment management and maintenance officer from Ida Verde's time has actually sort of really sort of supported with a lot of those activities and looking to improve some of that communication with allotment groups and associations. But I'm aware that we are having sort of a few conversations at the moment, maybe with, let's say, with Councillor Fairclough on a particular issue on a certain site. And again, Ida Verde are going beyond the call of duty to try and make those things work, obviously for the tenants in question. And again, why I highlighted at the start of the report, if there was any feedback that's coming in, obviously I'll take that away and work with the team. And the other bit that I would really like to sort of highlight there is some of the green space development activity that we've actually seen from the Ida Verde team. We have a commitment within the social value element of the contract with Ida Verde to look at sort of targeted opportunities for community engagement. I know that obviously the Ida Verde's Green Space Development Manager has been attending the last couple of forum meetings, obviously with the Independent Merton Friends and Green Spaces Forum, and we've had some quite nice success. So I'll just point the group to section 2.20, which relates to our 6,000 hours of Ministry of Justice community payback support. So we have obviously 4 projects and stuff that are working throughout the week, on the days. And I've implemented the detail about the Friends group and also some of the activity that those groups have actually been undertaking to support. And I've also highlighted there.
So Andrew, could you just final comments?
That's okay. I think that was my summary. I think it was all outlined between 2020 and sort of 2022 in terms of the summary of that additional activity. And then again, obviously, if I could just obviously sort of point the panel to the elements that were highlighted in the recommendations from the group previously, and that's between 2.8 to 2.18, and I kind of outlined the progress that the team, the council team, have actually made to progress some of those recommendations. So that's all outlined in the report. But as I say, any questions? That'll be the end of that part of the report.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. But before I have a chance to direct some questions towards him, I'd like now to invite Tony Burton from the Independent Merton Green Spaces Forum to speak to his annual report that was circulated around the panel. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Tony Burton. I'm the convener of the Independent Merton Green Spaces Forum. We set up in 2016 to provide a network and collective voice for friends and like-minded community groups for parks and green spaces across Merton. Quote, "Green spaces are the most valued aspect of life in Merton," unquote. You might expect us to think this, but the statement is in fact the outcome of Merton Council's own biggest ever conversation with the public. The pandemic has shown our green spaces are never more needed, and they provided a public health and well-being lifeline. Consequently, we are pleased to report more activity from Merton Council supporting projects in parks and introducing wildways, and many constructive dealings with ID Verde. But there is no getting away from the problems with ID Verde delivering the contract. However you measure it, ID Verde's performance continues to be below par. The annual target has never been met, and as a panel, you have not been receiving monitoring information on the key performance measures in your papers for at least 28 months. At the beginning of this contract, we were promised by Merton Council that standards would not fall. Despite performance meeting targets in the latter part of 2022, we believe that the promise is being broken. This panel plays an important role in holding ID Verde and Merton Council to account. We've been closely following the uptake of your recommendations, especially when they were agreed by Cabinet in 2020. You asked for improved reporting of contract performance. It has got worse. You asked for green spaces strategy. 30 months later, we don't even have a timetable or process for its production. You asked for a one-stop web-based reporting tool for the public. Fix My Street has been introduced, but not for parks and green spaces. You asked for quarterly written updates on ID Verde's performance. 30 months later, and none have been produced. You supported a quarterly stakeholder meeting, including us at the forum. None have been held. Merton Council likes to praise friends and like-minded groups, and there is no doubting the importance of the volunteer time and energy they invest and the skills and experience they bring. Yet too much that happens in our green spaces is poorly communicated. Major changes should not come as a surprise to those volunteers most closely involved. The first time Tree Wardens Merton or Friends of the Cannons knew of plans for community planting of over 6,000 trees on Cranmer Green was when the papers for this meeting were first put online. Our meeting with ID Verde and Merton Council last week had too many stories of poor communications, unnecessary tree felling, excessive work on hedges, and the loss of meadows to poorly directed grass mowing and more. We believe the root causes are first, ID Verde does not have enough staff and too many lack the horticultural skills needed to get the basics right. Second, there is a chronic lack of knowledge of the local circumstances of different parks and green spaces in ID Verde contractors. Third, the contract needs much more active and assertive management by Merton Council. And fourth, green spaces need a clear borough-wide strategy for their future, and individual sites need basic management plans. Much of this is recognised, and there are even commitments to act, but we still experience too little action. Our annual review includes a plan of action, and we commend it to you. The forum is here this evening because communities across Merton care passionately about their local green spaces. This contract has been running for over 6 years, and delivery is falling short. Merton Council needs to do much more to involve communities, challenge performance, set expectations, and ensure our precious parks and green spaces are managed to the high standards we all deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Before I open questions, to respond, so Natasha, then maybe I can pass over to Andrew. So after you, Natasha.
Yeah, and I'll just respond on a couple of points. I think Andrew can respond on more of the technical points and the recommendations and the falling short of them. I made those recommendations when I was chair of this panel, and I'm trying to deliver on them. There was a delay with COVID in the middle of that, when we first made those recommendations, and we are going to talk to you tonight about the tree strategy, which is one of those recommendations, and is something that has taken a while to get off the ground, but I'm incredibly proud of. In terms of the green spaces strategy, in your papers, you'll read why there's been a delay, and it links to the wider green strategy in across London. And if we produced our strategy before knowing what was in that, then we would have to restart that kind of work, and we would end up, that would be taking up a lot of resource and time from officers. So we're just waiting for that guidance from across London, and so that we can make sure that we are feeding into a kind of pan-London approach. In terms of things like reporting, as I said, when Fix My Street is live, the next iteration is to get it into our parks. It needs to happen. The way the reporting is at the moment is not good enough, and isn't the way we would want a modern council to be run. And I completely accept that the communications could be better, and is something that, again, we need to get better at, especially around things like tree felling, because unnecessary anger and frustration from residents. If a tree needs to be felled, they need to know it's happening and why. And if a tree is going to be replaced, they need to know when it's going to be replaced. And that's something that Andrew's team is trying to work on with the comms team, so we could send a letter out to people, put up sandwich boards just to let them know the work is happening. It's a simple ask. And in terms of management plans, we're again trying to push for more green flags which come with management plans, and we're taking more friends groups through the process of applying for green flag, which then helps them to create a management plan. So step by step, we are getting there on some of these recommendations, but I will let Andrew come in terms of things like the reporting and what, if you're missing any data in your packs in every meeting.
That's great. Thanks very much, Councillor Lyons, and thank you very much, Tony, for the points raised. As I say, yes. So as I pretty take on board the point of view relating to the Parks and Open Spaces strategy. So obviously the Parks team have been working quite closely with Tony Leach and obviously Parks for London and London Parks Benchmarking Forum. As I say, so information, as Natasha mentioned, obviously within the we're actually waiting for some documentation to come through from the GLA that would allow, obviously, the open Parks and Open Spaces strategy to be developed, that would have targets that wouldn't be out of date before we'd actually commenced. Obviously, I'm happy if the panel would like me to provide a bit more detail on that and the sort of summary feedback that we've had from Parks for London, because as I say, we do feel that we can still carry out a very robust sort of scoping exercise, working with both internal departments as well as with friends and stakeholders to actually develop the key elements that could go into that Parks and Open Spaces strategy. But without the GLA recommendations, I think we might actually be sort of preempting something that would mean we might have to go backwards afterwards. As I say, as Natasha mentioned, with regards to the reporting, and that's obviously around the performance. I know that we have obviously discussed that as a Green Spaces team, obviously along with our portfolio holder, and we are actually looking at the best way. And I know we did sort of discuss it at the last Independent Merton Green Spaces Forum, to say that if we were to look at sometime during February, that we would actually be able to put that information, be able to put that on online, so people can actually sort of see that the performance monitoring we're doing. And I know there was a previous paper that went through to the panel that actually related to obviously how the PQMS system works, and it obviously got a lot of the background information. So maybe that's another document that could be shared. But again, that's something we're looking at, and obviously looking to try and get that online. I think the other point that Tony raised is with regards to the management and maintenance plans of the Parks and Open Spaces. So as Natasha pointed out, we are looking to add further green flag sites this year, and we are looking to do a year-on-year commitment to try and to get a further two parks actually added to green flag. Obviously, as a nationally recognised sort of standard for parks across the whole country, as well as internationally now, we do feel that that's a really good mechanism. And as I say, I think we've got some very good working examples of how working with a friends group to develop the green space strategy can actually draw funding in to that particular park as well. And I always hark back to the example, but Abbey Recreation Ground is a particularly good, strong example. And, you know, sort of representative there, we're as End Residents Association are actually a really good example of what can be done with a strategy behind the park and actually how that could lead to internal investment. But again, I think the key thing is that I think we're now round the table. I believe previously the communication wasn't fantastic from our side. I think we have seen a marked improvement, but again, I want to increase that further. And again, I think in line with those commitments, I think, you know, obviously I have summarised those obviously on the 2.8 to 2.18 where the progress has been made. But as Tony, you know, does highlight, we do need to push those forward. But it's based on, you know, the fact of the team and the number of members of staff we have to deliver that. Is that okay, Chair?
Brilliant. Thanks so much. We'll now open the floor to questions. So any questions that we'll start Victoria.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a few of Tony's points more specifically. So there were 3 KPIs, I think, that were reduced. I don't think any explanations just been given for why that was at any point. So it'd just be good to understand. I think they're in their reports, so I'll just find them. Under point 5 in their report, it's grounds maintenance standards, litter and cleansing standards, and grass verge standards. And then in terms, so I've got 2 more, is that okay? In terms of the reporting then, if we haven't had any to this committee for 30 months, I guess just understanding why that is and what we could do to improve that. And then the quarterly stakeholder meetings, there just seems to be a bit of difference of opinion about whether they're happening or not. So just good to understand, I guess, what Tony's interpretation of them is versus what the council's interpretation, and how we can make sure that they are delivered if they're not being already done so.
Jeez. Also, and if you also try and keep your answers relatively brief, if you can, just kind of comment about looking for other questions as well at the same time.
Thank you very much, Chair. In terms of the KPI reference, there was a reduction. Could you clarify just a bit further on that question?
Yes, it says in Tony's report that a number of measures were reduced in May 22, but there's no rationale for this change. States that there was an old target of 5 for grounds and maintenance standards, which was reduced to 4.9. Litter and cleansing standards went from 5 to 4.95, and grass verge standards went from 5 to 4.5.
Thank you very much. Those are in alignment with the projected deliverables of those KPIs. In the previous presentation I brought to this panel, I outlined that the requirement contractually is between 4 to 4.99. Anything above 5 is an exceedance of the contract standard. Any values that are assessed below 4 in the contract are a penalty to the provider. So the measure was to tune the SPIs so that they were relevant to what was being delivered on the contract. So we have a moderately robust and high level of performance, but we want to always seek continuous improvement in our contract monitoring and management. So we want to always be tuning those in to be exceeding that, to look for that forward progression. I hope that's addressed that problem with the SPIs. In terms of, if you could remind me on the other question.
The other point was around the frequency of performance reporting to this panel. Again, it was said we haven't had anything for 13 months, I believe so. Just for there's a move, I think, to annual reporting. And then the final one was just around the quarterly stakeholder meetings.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of the reporting, there was a change over that period of the chairs of the committee, and there wasn't a call from the chair for a specific report following the cabinet recommendations for that to officers. So from that, setting the agenda, we haven't provided a report. If that's something the chair would like, we could regularly have a 2-page report coming to each of the meetings. in respect to the performance. We hold monthly contract meetings with the service provider, and from that we also have monthly reports in terms of the service. So we do have that reporting done on a monthly basis to ensure that integrity is and they're robustly managed. In terms of the quarterly group, in terms of a quarterly meeting with relevant active members in parks, we have yet to establish that. And that's something that I've discussed with the head of parks in order to take forward in establishing a key stakeholder group associated with it. So the Independent Merton Green Spaces Forum is a valued stakeholder, but there are other stakeholders across the whole of our parks across the borough that we need to engage with to make sure it's fairly represented. And the intention is to hold quarterly meetings in the Civic Center or represented community hall, so we can have the thoughts of many people who use our parks in different ways feedback into it and how they want to see those develop. Thank you.
Can I ask just a quick question just to clarify on this reporting that was happening? Then you mentioned this change of chair. I guess to ask what reports were we receiving before then, and I guess why that stopped, and I guess maybe also approaching, is that something maybe possible to restart again if that would be of use, and how practical that would be?
Thank you, Chair. We've only gone to this panel with the formal reporting that we have here. We haven't produced from this recommendation a singular agreed format of a report that this panel the chair would like to receive at this panel. So that action didn't commence in terms of that, and we have had and during that time there have been movement within the service, a loss of head of a service, a recruiting of a new head of service, and other activities where we haven't established what that is. Be happy to confer with you after the meeting and establish type of reporting you'd like to receive on the basis of that. Happy to produce that. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions, Caroline?
Yeah, I just wanted to really talk about the communications. I know the Friends groups do an absolutely brilliant job, but I feel that the other park users aren't really being given a chance to have their say either. I mean, for instance, we've got quite a small friends group in our local park, and most of the members don't live in the ward. And I know the park is there for everybody, but I mean, I had a lot of my residents ringing me up quite upset when our bins were removed. I wasn't even told about it. The first I knew about it was when I went to the park. There was a big fly tip where the bin used to be, and there were like bags of dog's dirt tied to the fence. So that's one thing. And the second thing, I know this is going to sound very selfish because I'm thinking of my own ward, but obviously we've got a big regeneration project in our ward, and there is now only one access from the estate to the main road, and it is a really, really long detour. Now, Paul McGarry's not here. Oh, it's a shame he isn't, because I would direct this to him. But I mean, now the only real access to that main road is through our park, and I need to stick up for my residents here and say that they should have been given the priority. We should have made sure beforehand that that route was a safe route for them and that they were going to be given that. So yeah, so it is the communication. I think we need to consider everybody who uses the parks, not just the friend groups.
Thanks, Caroline. Tash, you want to take that? Yeah.
I think you maybe for the second point, it might be worth just maybe speaking to, because I think I remember there was some kind of agreement with the access. Maybe we need to speak to the team and the preacher and to hammer out what's gone on there. But with the wider point of making sure that everybody is communicating with, I think that's fair. I think most our friends groups are especially the ones I've had an opportunity to meet, I'm in awe of them actually, and the work that they do and the time that they spend just off their own back to make our park so special. But I think you're right in that we may need to make sure that every park user feels that they're included and that they are consulted on things that might be happening. So that is for us to take away in terms of how we don't just kind of assume that if it's put to one group, it'll go to everybody. It's for the comms team here to make sure we've got, good posters in these parks and that we've done a proper communication strategy for all park users. I think that's a fair point.
No, if Andrew, you wanted to add anything to that, or you?
Councillor Ryan has covered those points, but I know that Councillor Charles, I know we've had a discussion with Martin Smith from obviously Paul McGarry's team, so we'll update you tomorrow in terms of the opportunity they're working with another department.
And also, if you are going to make changes like removing bins and like removing playground equipment, because I know there's another issue with the trampoline, if you could advise me before it actually happens, because I'm actually the interface with the general public and I get people ringing me, sending me emails. So I really need to know what's going on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Charles. I know that we're having the discussions, obviously, with Tamas in terms of the replacement of the trampoline in question, which obviously will be agreed and that will be put back in. So,
thanks so much, Anthony.
Thank you. My first is just a point of clarification. Actually, the recommendations, I presume that's a typo, and that recommendation D should in fact be recommendation C, or are we missing a recommendation? Because there is a part C referred to, so I just wanted to check that was that. My substantive question was around the contract itself. So obviously, rather like the waste contracts, the parks management contracts are also coming up for renewal in due course. And I wondered if officers might be able to outline the process of moving forward with that. I've got a much better understanding of how we're moving forward with the next steps for the Veolia contracts, but I don't have any understanding of how we're moving forward with the going forward with the parks maintenance contracts. And specifically, I wanted to pick up on the suggestion that Merton needed more active contract management. And I wondered actually if officers might comment on whether they think the contract works for us. There are two reasons the contract might not work. One, it might not be, effectively managed, or it might just be a very difficult contract to manage. Obviously, some of those things we can repair as we enter into new contracts. So it'd be interesting to get some input as to what officers feel about that.
Great, thank you. Andrew, I think that was 3 questions there. So you okay with them, or John?
Thank you much, Chair. In terms of the recommendation, yes, that is a typo. I do apologize. In terms of the contract solution, first, we have taken a conscious decision to deal with the Phase C Lot 1, which is the waste and recycling services first. But officers have been preparing plans in the background in order to Q2 this year bring forth the plan in terms of the Phase C Lot 2 service requirement. Active contract management, I agree. Active contract management, relationship management, better communication. Those are the principles that we're instilling within our team, which is fundamental and important. In terms of how are they performing, I think through better communication and having better presence, I have a head of park services now who has a lot of intrinsic knowledge in the way ID Verde works, but as you can see tonight, he's very passionate about the subject, and he instills that passion amongst his colleagues who manage the contract on the behalf of residents and the council as a whole. And I have seen things improve over the last year in a very positive direction. Parks are also, and it is where we view parks, if we view them from 10 years ago, there is a significant impact on budgets in terms of what we can expend on parks. We also have statutory services we heard this evening in terms of balanced budgets. Parks are very project orientated. A lot of the activity you see in here in terms of development is reliant on securing funding solutions in terms to do that. So there is kind of a ebb and a flow to the management of those parks, and that's part of the business now. That's why green flags are supported by detailed management plans to try to generate more sustainability with that, and that's the hard work that we're undertaking right now. So I agree that active contract management is important, and I think that in the background, I can give you assurances we're taking those vital steps to improve that and improve performance. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I just need a couple more questions. So is there any more? And do you want to ask one, Martin? Then we might, and Stephen, and then we'll, because we've still got the tree strategy to discuss. So I'm just conscious of time. Dan, is it a short? Going to be a short question? I don't believe you, but we'll go with that anyway. Okay, but if everyone just keep their questions as short as possible, if you can try to keep your answers quick, just so we have time to get to the tree strategy as well.
Thank you, and thank you for the answers there. It was more a follow-up of, do you have in mind, or are you preparing changes to the way that the contract and the contract management might work, or are you just happy with the way it works at the moment?
With any continuation of a contract, either through an extension, a variation, or a recommissioning or a review of the whole model, I would always expect more. We always want to review more and see where there's weaknesses. There are some weaknesses. I'm not a big fan of the PQMS system. That is not something that I would probably propose going forward if I was to look at this again. But I'm dealing with the contract I have in hand. And in the future, that's something we would review. We'd have something probably a bit more tuned in. And as my discussions with my head of service, I also want to put going forward a lot more emphasis on horticulture. So we're trying to look at how we can insert expertise into the council to help develop our horticultural credentials. Thank you.
Now, I might just take the next three questions just in one go, just so enough time to get through them all. So if I go to Martin and then Stephen and then to Dan.
I'd just like to ask about green flags. There's always been a concern about the amount of green flags which are on the west parks and the west of the borough. It's obviously increasing the numbers which are in the east of the borough. I know that does need to have friends groups, which is, I think, slightly more challenging having them in the east. But do you hope to increase the number of green flags over the next year? Because I think that really does give an indicative measure about the quality of our parks. And I will say as well, I think our parks have done extremely well, especially during COVID, but also as well, given the huge budgetary cuts that we've had to make over the last 13 years. When you've lost significant amounts of money, and given obviously, parks was one of those areas, I think you've done well in terms of managing those resources with less. And I think we should be proud of many of our parks in this borough, and I think we should be positive about them.
Thanks, Martin. Stephen.
Thanks. I was just interested in the delays on the green spaces strategy. My understanding is that we are waiting to a degree for what might come down from the GLA. But I wonder whether, given the importance of our green spaces, the fact we are one of the greenest boroughs and its importance to us, whether we shouldn't be leading to an extent rather than following, and whether we might think about being more proactive while we're waiting.
I wanted to ask about something which I know used to be part of ID Verdi's responsibilities. I'm not sure if it still is now, or so if you can give me an update about income generation or revenue generation and its role with ID Verdi, and if there's an update on that.
Thanks, Dan. And if John Andrew give you the answers relatively to the point, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Just take the first question because it would have come up in the performance report. The item around the number of green flags. We're currently on target to increase the number of green flags by 3 by the end of the year, taking the total to 9, which is above the target of 7. An increase of 3.
And one of those is in the cannons. That's one of the reasons. But yes, is the answer. Yes, we want to get more green flags in the east of the borough. And yes, I'm very much we're live to that.
Just going to come in there as well. So again, I know I attended a meeting in the Longthornton ward linked to Rowan Park. And again, this was a kind of a meeting that was attended with kind of Safer Merton and the police, other parties, lots of friends groups and stuff from the Housing Association. So yeah, certainly, I think the discussions that we've had with the Independent Merton Friends Forum was linked to these kind of the green flag light, which is basically the action plan that's linked to the key judging criteria, and that's something that we can readily work on, with the groups. So again, there's not too much of a time-bound orientation on that. It would just be that we would pick our focus in terms of looking at priorities and making sure that we do have an even spread. So again, as Councillor Ryan's mentioned, we have got obviously we have got the cannons, which is linked to a wider HLF bid. We do have obviously Hayden's Road Recreation Ground, which is one of our sites with a multi-use sports area improvement and a very strong and a dedicated friends group. And then we're also working with the Friends of Canizaro Park as well as Wimbledon, because that's kind of one of our largest arboretums and a space that should already have green flag. But as I say, working with the active friends group there, we've put that management plan together. So that was a brief update on those green flag.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the next 2 points. In terms of the green spaces strategy, really important. But when the first recommendation was made, we prioritized the tree strategy, which we'll have a paper later. So we held that in abeyance. And then, as articulated in the action log, there has been a overarching plan that is developing London-wide. We need to, I understand leading sometimes. I like to be the first follower sometimes because it's probably less costly in some ways if you miss anything out. So we're going to take that approach, see what happens develop London-wide, how our tree strategy develops to feed into our wider green spaces strategy. So we have those constituent elements to inform that larger strategy. In terms of revenue in parks, from a council's perspective, is mostly associated with event activities that we hold within the parks. So we maintain the control for that. In terms of all of the other activities in the park, that's built within the very complex pay mechanism that is associated with the contract provision. So there's a model within that. We have the assurance that we get a guaranteed income from that, which is offset in the budget in terms of the total cost of delivery. In terms of what officers do and Andrew does with our head of leisure and culture, is about the social activities in our parks to produce more income from a commercial perspective. I hope that's answered that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. With no final other points, then I will quickly move us on to the tree strategy also.
I was just going to suggest a couple of recommendations, actually. Is that possible? The first would be around the reporting. Could we recommend that we return to quarterly reporting back to this panel on the performance of Ida Verde?
Steer on from the officers on the practicalities of that. Is that something that we can do fairly easily?
Yeah, yes, we can do quarterly reporting and how detailed the progress between those quarters is and the regularity of the meetings to have that agenda, but more than happy to do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So I think Rosie, is that word? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You put your mic. Oh, no. Okay. Okay. Cool.
Chair, have we got the capacity to do quarterly? I mean, we have lots of things that we review. It's another thing is going to go in there. Is it going to get the same amount of scrutiny if we're looking at it every quarter? Have we got the time?
I mean, it's always, one of those things is, we always have too much that you can monitor as it is. But in terms of maybe, just a mechanism to hold to account and to measure when we do come to look at it and be able to see the progress, I don't think, if it's something that we can produce fairly easily, then I don't see the too much harm in that. And if that's something that we've already agreed in the past, then I think we can just make that happen.
It was in the performance indicators, actually, because it's, we have the measure and it's just annual at the moment. So just switching that, not necessarily producing a huge report, but just getting the numbers at least quarterly.
Yeah.
I think it'd be helpful maybe to, instead of having a formal report like this, to have it on the back of maybe the performance monitoring section. That's a regular item.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Where we can bring a separate report, which gives a dashboard overview of the performance of the ID Verde contract. And that, and we could talk to that point.
That sounds great.
Okay.
If you can do that.
Yeah, no problem. Thank
That'd
you
be
very
great. And are there any?
And just the other one was around the cabinet commitments. I'm just conscious that these things can just run on and on through no fault of anyone. It's just, would it be better to have some dates put against them so that everyone knows sort of dates we're working towards to deliver them?
Which pieces are you talking about particularly? Sorry.
I think the recommendation would be something along the lines of to ask Cabinet to review the recommendations previously passed and put some timeframes around them. So to give Cabinet the ability to determine that themselves.
So I guess my question would be like, what isn't happening at the moment that needs that? What is it? Particular ones you're looking at that
obviously
left behind?
From page 15, we've got the recommendations that were passed when Councillor Irons was the chair of this panel. And obviously we have a brief narrative on some of these things. Well, a brief narrative on all of these things, but some of them have made more progress than others. So it might be helpful to ask Cabinet to look at these and consider what the priorities are, how quickly some of these things can be achieved. Otherwise, they just kind of float on and there's no sort of end to them. So we obviously don't want to tie Cabinet up. We know Cabinet's very busy, but it might be helpful to put in place some timeframes, or for them to put in place some timeframes around some of these things.
Well, actually, I think the Cabinet member here to maybe get your reflections, Natasha, on how that would be.
It's me. I'd have everything done yesterday if it was up to me. That's obviously clearly not going to happen. So I think I'd like to just get the sense from officers, but I don't think there'd be anything wrong with having dates, so long as you weren't necessarily concerned about if those dates weren't next week. If we could just have realistic timeframes, because as I said, with the green spaces strategy, we don't know when that data is coming. We have committed to doing a bit of a scoping exercise pre that, but we don't know when that date's going to come. So if I gave you an arbitrary date of next year, that would just be useless. So I'm happy to come back with some dates, but can we just first have a chat with officers to see what's realistic? And yeah, can we have commit to some realistic dates, not ones that are, next week?
That sounds good to me. I guess the only thing would just be, when do you think you might be able to come back with those preliminary dates that obviously we can judge as they go along? When do you think that might be possible?
I'd have to consult with officers, I'm afraid. I wouldn't be able to pluck that out. I suppose we can. When's the next meeting?
The 13th.
Can I maybe suggest, obviously it's put onto the work programme, there's obviously a further report. I know there's a lot on in terms of the next agenda, but maybe a further report back in the summertime, probably the first meeting of the SUSCOMs. I know we're starting to think ahead now, but obviously I think given the preparation time, it'd probably be better. Yeah, we do have reports rather than having ID Verde on the next agenda. We'll obviously have the performance information, but I think it's it's given all the other commitments as well.
If we came back in the summer with dates, that would probably be fair enough. I think if we came back here with those dates, that gives us enough time.
Maybe like Dan says, for the June meeting to come back with dates for some of those.
But those dates might not necessarily.
But we can have a look at them when we get them back then. But that sounds good to me. So is that okay? Brilliant. So I'm also conscious of time. So if we move now on to the tree strategy discussion, and if I could ask John, if I maybe just I'm just assuming everyone's had a chance to go through the documents, so maybe don't explain too much. Maybe just give it a couple minutes overview, and then we'll have some chance for questions from members.
So thank you, Chair, and thank you to John and to Andrew for pulling this together. As we said before, this recommendation to do a tree strategy came out of this committee in 2020. So I'm delighted to be able to finally give you an update and tell you where we've got to. So as everyone knows, through our commitment to a climate action plan, we're trying to increase our tree canopy cover by 10% by 2050. And that means that's to help mitigate the impacts of climate change, whether that's getting rid of particulates or cooling streets and providing canopy and increasing biodiversity. So to do that, we need to not just plant new trees, but protect the trees we currently have. And there was a lack of management and oversight of that without having a strategy that could kind of talk about planting the right tree in the right time at the right place, and has robust management plans for our trees. So the report outlines the progress from phase 1, which is solely focused on council trees. It's what we own and what we can control. Phase 2 will look at what we can do around privately owned trees, because again, we can't grow that canopy to 10% by ourselves. We will need to do it with private land and people's gardens, businesses and that sort of thing. So this will come back to you again in February, and then we should hopefully get the strategy in March, on the 9th of March to Cabinet. Yeah, so we've had a good consultation period that we had 2 phases to. The second phase, we had 8 really detailed responses from friends groups, from societies like Friends of the Earth and from Merton's tree wardens. And again, thank you for their time and their commitment to this process. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about the report, and I will stop speaking so we can get to questions.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Are there any thoughts, questions, reflections on the tree strategy? Dan?
Yeah, thank you for that. A quick query about what the council's view is on what I like to term as militant insurance companies, who are increasingly requesting and demanding both private trees in people's gardens and also street trees to be felled. What's the council's view on that? And also, when we look at climate change, how can we make sure we keep the trees that we've recently planted? Because I'm aware quite a few died in the heat wave.
Obviously, Andrew and John will come in with the technicalities. My first response to the kind of aggressive insurers is rogue short insurers, you were calling them. We have the part of having a robust tree strategy is to try and prevent us getting to the situation where we have trees that are damaging property, and we have plans for them. I think the tree team does a lot of work to try and prevent unnecessary felling of very mature trees next to property, but sometimes it gets to that point when it has to happen. But I think having a tree strategy in place will help us to avoid those situations in future, and it highlights exactly why we need this strategy as quickly as possible. In terms of making sure that they, once we've made the investment to plant new trees, that they survive, it's making sure we've got the investment then for the aftercare, because as we know, the tree itself isn't expensive, it's what happens next. I think we're going to hit 10,000 trees this year, but that's because we've managed to get external funding to look after the trees for 3 years after they're planted, to make sure that they've got the watering and the tending to that they needed. And that's from external funding, not from our own budgets. And that's down to the tree team and to Andrew's team for working crazily hard to find that funding externally. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
Thank you very much. In terms of the tree strategies, we're developing policies which will support us to have a standard point where our default position will be to look at every possible reasonable mechanism to retain that tree. It turns into a legal position, and that's where we do require detailed and thorough analysis from qualified arboricultural third-party consultants to provide a set of information. So if people want to get overly litigious in regards to that, we will be robust in our responses to it. Some maybe looking backwards, there would have been maybe a compromise in maybe looking at taking a tree out to resolve something that was complex. I can guarantee you with these new policies, we will have a position where we will retain that tree as much as reasonably practicable. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions, Dan?
thanks for reporting and all the work you guys are doing. I was really interested to learn that this certain types of trees are much better at capturing air particulates and are better for eliminating air pollution. Apparently, silver birch, yew, and elder are the best ones. So, what kind of species of trees are we planting, or would we be planting? Like, do we know like the mix?
Just brief answer. Kind of ask you to go as well. If you just keep your question very, very brief, though, if you could.
Yeah, I just want to ask with the tree planting, and I know this is going to sound like I'm making a plug for my own ward, but that's what they elected me to do. So I will stick up for my residents and say, obviously, they've lost an awful lot of trees recently because of the regeneration. More mature trees are going to go in Morden Road. They had all those mature trees that went with the Mitcham Bridge business. So what I'm asking on behalf of the people that elected me to represent them, if my ward can be prioritised for tree planting, that's it.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if I second that request, but over to you, John, Natasha.
Okay, thank you very much. I think all members want to prioritize themselves in respect to tree planting. But if you'd like to speak to Andrew, and he will be able to provide you the trees we plan to plant in your area. I was at Mitcham Bridge last year when we planted up the scheme and replaced, I believe, 50% more trees in that location than that were removed as part of that scheme. So we are committed and have been committed in providing more trees. Councillor Johnson, to answer your question, tree mixes, we can send you the list after in terms of complexity. I think the interesting thing, silver birches don't last as long as you want them to, but we're also looking at conifers and different conifer species that we currently don't see within our street scene to make it a bit more dynamic and not so related to the typical trees that have been planted year after year, make it a bit more dynamic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any final reflections on this? I'll go to it in a second, and then moving on to performance monitoring. So I'll pass it to you, Victoria.
Yes, just a quick question on 4.5, which was the collation of the stakeholder feedback. I had a quick chat to Andrew about this, but we can actually see that paper this time because there was no access for the panel, just there was an issue with the online access. So just wanted to just ensure that when it comes for the next panel meeting, when we get the report, that we can clearly see what the feedback was, what the recommendations were, and where they've been taken on board by council officers, just so it's really clear where the changes have been made.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion. And yeah, I'll say as final marks, just, you know, it's very exciting to finally get into this process now. We're going to have this tree strategy soon, and I think we'll be very interested in seeing the delivery of this, you know, over the coming months and years, and seeing what we can do to make Merton even greener. So now I'm going to move on to performance monitoring, and just before I pass over to one of the ADs, I'm going to invite Aidan, who's joined us online, who'd like to speak to one of the pieces in there. So Aidan, if I could pass over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can. You're a little bit quiet, but we can.
Cool. Sorry, I'll just move the mic. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I mean, I think is everyone going to hear them? Yeah, go for it.
Fantastic. No, yeah, thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak and update your scrutiny panel on an issue that officers and myself have identified affecting the reported performance statistics for development and building control. This means the department has significantly underreported their performance for the last 6 months. So work is ongoing to identify the root cause of the issue. And however, we suspect it's a technical and a process issue. So what officers and myself would like to do is provide a report to this committee that updates the performance record, set out the background to the issue, and makes some suggestions that the panel may be interested in supporting to reduce the risk of the issue happening again in the future. So before I answer any questions that you may have, I suspect the first one may be, well, can you give me an example of an updated figure? So if you take a look at CRP 052 in your pack, the value presented to you is 44% with a target of 73%. So our preliminary analysis suggests the updated figure is in fact 76%, beating the target. So I share this with you as an example so the panel can understand and be prepared for the movement in our performance reporting correcting this issue will result in. I'm happy to answer any questions now, or alternatively, in the interest of time, feel free to contact me offline and happy to discuss and run through.
I'm happy to take a question if there is one. Otherwise, I think it might be wise to wait for that report that you said will be circulated, and then that probably will answer a lot of the questions. So is there anyone who wants to say anything? Adrian.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Councillor Mundy for raising that, as I was going to raise it at when we went through the performance report. Yes, as he says, we're happy to provide an updated set of figures once we've analysed the data and looked at the technical issues that are surrounding the performance.
Thank you. Aidan, thank you very much for coming along, and we were noting that reports, and it'd be great to get that when it's ready to see what happened there. So thank you very much for joining us. I think maybe if I could pass to maybe Adrian and John for a very brief. It is now 7 minutes to 10, and I'm hoping to finish before we can get the finish. Maybe just keep me short on a couple of questions. We might have time for, and apologies that we always get to performance monitoring and it ends up getting squished right in at the very end. So if I pass to one of you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll quickly run through them. I mean, CRP 044, which is parking services estimated revenue. I think we're all aware of the impact of the pandemic and the ongoing behavioural changes of people working from home, which has impacted immensely on the revenue in parking services. So that's that one. I'll just pick through a few. Regulatory services, my colleague AD for Public Protection, Calvin, would just say a few words on air quality.
Yeah, we spoke, Councillor Ryan said earlier on around the mitigation we can do as a Council for Air Quality. We don't have lots of control over that, but the good thing is London has a strategy coordinated by the GLA. So we are doing our bits. We're trying really good equipment right across the borough in key areas to get good data to allow us to know where we need to focus our mitigation, be that through education, be that through tree planting and so on. That continues. It will continue into the next year as part of our climate action plan. We would like to see, in particular, more inspections and more monitoring in those high pressure areas. But I'll use an example in Weir Road. If you're familiar with the Weir Road area, lots of waste disposal sites, lots of pollution into the environment, and we're having some success there with our air quality team. Just wanted to pick up one on which I'm sure members would have picked up around service requests and the target not being met there. There is a resourcing issue which we're trying to address, but it is improving, and we are going through a data. We're changing systems, and as you be aware, also we have a regulatory services partnership with Richmond and Wandsworth as well. So that is improving. It's not where it should be. We would like to be getting back to our customers within 5 days. But what I can assure all of you is that the very urgent items are being picked up. But we want to ensure that it's a consistent customer service approach right across the board. So just to give you that reassurance. Other than that, the other air quality data, a lot of that we can't measure in sort of quarterly or monthly or even sometimes annually. We need to see the trends over about 3 years, which is why some of that is missing on there. And that's all I want to add. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Are there any questions I can see 3. Okay, if we keep very brief and take them all at once, if I can go down.
Yeah, thank you. Waste management, household waste recycled, CRP 097, percentage of waste recycled. As Alderman Dean likes to remind me, outside of this place, the council's missed its target again. And also, the actual question is, why is the November target 50%, whereas the annualized target claims to be 45? Is there a mismatch in targets?
Dan?
Can I ask about parks and the number of outdoor events in parks monthly? I know the target's 9, we've got 0. But also, what does this capture? I know there were like the firework displays in November, and this is a November figure, so surely it can't be 0 unless that's reflected somewhere else.
Victoria.
I was just following up on the Ida Verde point about the switch from monthly to annual measures. Just all of the measurements that are annual, how do we know at which point in the year they're going to be reported to us? Because I think it was probably missed because of that, because we could just have our reports and not notice that we haven't had one for 12 months. So is there a way that we could put a date against the annual measure so we know when it's due so that we don't miss it?
Good question. John, Adrian?
I'll take the first one. I'll take the reverse. Ida Verde, I don't see any problem with a set date. I'm happy to agree that with officers and yourselves. In terms of the mismatch of the percentage,
in terms of, these are corporate reporting, so there's a corporate governance officer who checks that reporting to make sure it's up to date and accurate, but we could add the annual year in respect to that. Community events, in terms of community events, that the events are more about the community events, not our larger income driven events. So they're more about the use of a park by community events that are organized by ID Verde. So to measure for us to also keep track of those events in which they occur. And in terms of the recycling rate at 50% was the contractual target rate that was put into the contract in 2016, and through the evolution of that. The underperformance of it, the 45% was the in-year target rate, but we didn't want to lose sight of our optimized target rate. That's why the 50% remains there. But we have an operational rate that, as you can see, month to month, we're almost there. We're almost hitting that. At 44.32% was the previous month. I forget what the figure is now. I don't have it straight in my screen. But we wanted something that allows officers to monitor current performance versus something which is a stretch target. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, John and Adrian. Very much appreciate that. Just to ask now, is the work program agreed for the next meeting? All agreed? And so all is just to close the meeting, just to thank you all for coming this evening, and just to know the next meeting will be taking place on the 13th of February. So thanks so much, everyone. Cheers.